Hello everyone, welcome to Indian Economy by Aman Soni. In this new series called PREority, we would be discussing the important economic concepts for the upcoming prelims examination. Now, let's discuss the topic asset monetization. Let's understand what is monetization. Asset is a tangible fixed asset, for example, land, building, etc. When you say monetization of that asset, it means that you are generating revenue out of that asset. So, a basic example would be if you have land or a building, if you would lease it on rent, the leasing on rent is the monetizing of the asset. Because it is getting a cash flow to you, you are monetizing the asset. So when you say monetize something, it would get currency to you. You would get a cash flow to you, you would get revenue. That is known as monetization. Now what is asset monetization when it comes to the government that the government is talking about? If we see, there are various public sector undertakings which are not performing well, and they have lots of surplus land, lots of buildings which they are not using. For example, the railways and defense have so much land and everything is not used by the railways and defense. So if the government can lease this amount, lease this land and the building to the private sector, it can generate revenue, and that is exactly what is asset monetization all about. Because there are so many unused and underused assets, there is underutilization of resources happening. Now because of the surplus land and assets and building, the government is planning to lease them to the private sector so that the government can generate revenue. This is called asset monetization. So what would happen under the asset monetization? It would create new source of revenue for the government, because anyway this is unutilized potential. A basic example would be, you have additional 4 place in your building, so you would rent out the extra 4 place to somebody else so that you can get the rent. Or if you have extra land, you are not cultivating on that land, so if you can lease that land to somebody who cultivates, you would get the lease amount or a share in the crop. So you're just having a proper utilization of the underutilized assets, and it would unlock the value of the assets. Now because they're lying waste there, when you lease them you would get some revenue, so it will unlock the value of the asset, and it would help in the best utilization of unutilized and underutilized public assets. As we have already discussed, there are various assets lying with the public sector undertakings which are underutilized and unutilized, and especially with the railways and defense. And when it comes to sectors like roads, here asset monetization would be that the government would go for, say, public private partnership. The government would give the rights for the toll collection to the private sector for a certain period of time. Then the government would also be getting revenue, the road is also maintained properly. This is what is the asset monetization all about. And the government came up with the total aim of almost monetizing 6 lakh crores through the national asset monetization pipeline. This is the initiative of the government. Here national monetization pipeline, the pipeline is nothing but, because it is getting revenue flow from various sectors through the government, they have come up with the name. And for the current fiscal year we have almost a target of 88,000 crores, and until 2025 we have target for various years, and the total sum would be almost approximately 6 lakh crores. And what is the main aim of this monetization? To tap the private sector investment and to create new infrastructure. Now because the assets are lying vacant with you, lying unutilized with you, if you can lease them, if you can sell them for a small period to the private sector, then you can tap in the private sector investment. They would be willing to invest. For example, you have some port capacity which you can lease it to the private sector. The private sector would invest into the port, so it would generate employment there, it would lead to the growth in the economy. After a certain expiry of the period, again you would get back the port, the government would have developed port, and it would have created trade benefits. Because of the developed port, foreign exchange would increase as the trade increases because of the increased facilities, so it would have multiplier effect in the economy. And the main thing that we need to remember here is, this is just monetization of the right. For example, if you say the road here, the government is just giving the right to collect the toll, the government is not giving the ownership to the private sector company. So the main thing to remember here is, under monetization, the government is not giving the ownership. In prelims, they can give a statement where they say that the ownership is transferred. That is totally wrong, because here just the right for monetization the asset, right for collecting revenues, right for the use of the asset is given, and after the expiry of a certain period of time, the assets are given back to the government, because the ownership is ultimately with the government. So basically it's like leasing for a certain period of time. So the main point is, the ownership is not transferred to the private sector companies. And the government also has said that they would have performance appraisals periodically when they are giving the assets to the private sectors. And what would be the impact of this monetization of assets? The main factor is utilization of this unutilized and underutilized assets. When you have the capacity and you are not using it, it is wastage of resources. So now that you are using it efficiently, it would lead to proper utilization, which is good for everyone. And because the private sector can participate in the purchase, they would invest. We took the port example, wherein the private sector would be interested to invest in the port. If you are leasing it for the 25 years to a private sector company, then the private sector company would do capital investment into a port. So that way the capital infrastructure of the port also would be increased. And because now the government is trying to promote this investment, it would lead to crowding in of the investments. Because now the private sector company wants to increase their capacity for investment, they would borrow from the market and they would invest into the infrastructure. That way indirectly it would also lead to crowding in of the private sector. And because when the port is developed, it would create additional employments, additional jobs in the local economy. So it would lead to the boost in the local economy in terms of jobs, in terms of employment, in terms of the revenue, and even the local panchayat and municipalities, they will get tax revenue, land revenue from the business or the port that is available there. And other thing is, it would generate financial resources for the government at a time when the government is suffering from fiscal deficit because of the rising oil prices and the Russia-Ukraine conflict and various external sector factors. This would give a new untapped source of revenue for the government. So it would also help the government in investing into other schemes like the social security schemes. When you have additional revenue from a new source of untapped potential, you can invest the same amount into capital investment, or you can invest that amount into social sector schemes. So this would again benefit everyone in the economy. There are various sectors from roads, railways, power generation, natural gas pipeline, telecom, warehousing, mining, aviation, ports and stadiums. But the top 5 sectors are roads, followed by railways, then power, then oil and gas and telecom. Here you need to know the ascending and descending order of that, because it can be a probable question in the prelims where they would ask, arrange the following sectors in terms of the contribution in the national monetization pipeline. So we need to remember roads, then railways, then power, then oil and gas and then telecom. So in terms of that, in order to pursue this, recently the cabinet has approved the National Monetization Corporation Limited. So what is this National Land Monetization Corporation Limited? In order to achieve the objective of this national asset monetization, the government is coming up with a new company, and it would be completely government owned company with an initial authorized share capital of 5,000 crores but a paid up share capital of 150 crores. Authorized share capital is how much the company can raise according to the documents of the company. Paid up share capital is how much it has already raised. What is the actual investment into the company by the government in the form of capital. So what is the actual capital? The actual shares that are subscribed out of this authorized share capital, that is the paid up share capital. This NLMC is under the administrative jurisdiction of the Finance Ministry. So here we can get a question, it is under a different ministry in the prelims. So we need to remember it is under the administrative jurisdiction of the Finance Ministry. And what is the purpose of creating this NLMC? In order to hold and monetize the surplus land and buildings of the government agencies, the public sector undertakings that are privatized or being shut down. As we have discussed, because of the surplus land and building, In order to monetize that, now they are creating a separate body for that. And how would it perform? It would perform by hiring professionals from the private sector, because it requires special skills and expertise in terms of evaluating the assets, in terms of planning, investment banking, land management, and all that. In order to achieve all that, private sector professionals would be hired, and that's how the government is planning to go for monetization. But even though the government has the target of 80,000 crores this time, the majority of that would, almost 60,000 of that, had to come from the issue of LIC shares. Now, because of the Russia-Ukraine conflict and the external factors like the oil crisis, now the government is not able to go for LIC share issue, privatization of LIC through initial public offer, because the markets are not doing well, and if the government goes for LIC issue now, it would perform badly. So the government is waiting for the right time. So if the government won't be able to issue the LIC shares, then it won't be able to achieve the target set for this year's. That's about this topic. Thank you so much.